다 동원들이야 상물로리야 아니 섬지 저시들 슈아잉.
First, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you, Tashidele.
저시들 된다시 보기다.
Lasso, Dandashe Gugde.
그래 마신 저시들 가양하고.
Tashidele means, may you be filled with auspicious goodness and joy.
아니 다리디에 옐 유니버시티리아 용하기 가수의 미세 대체장 쇼스 송체 내야 용하 처리 취업당 믹스에도 드린데 가수의 다 처리 취업들 투시 샤인.
And I would also like to thank everyone at Yale University who has been responsible for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to be here.
And honestly, 드린데 시엔좀 참으로리아 아니 투시 샤인.
And I would also like to thank all of you who have come here today.
지당기 가출하다 아메리카리아 용화들이 팀 숨버를 차디가래 제장 네 그뒤에 아메리카리아 용두산의 시스템리아 가출하다 지 미세다지 장왕기 천왕스는 자도 다나시 디기기 천왕 사버를 진기에 천왕용도 라버도 다리 University 망부질리아 자르체 네 가르에 자르체 소소임리아 루루도 토치두산에 네 망부지 가르 소소임에 로좀 망부스 태버지당 다나시 가르에 덴덴 셈리아 지 가르에 믹스에다 천왕침부 청소샤이스.
This is my third visit to the United States of America. And whenever I come here, I have a special feeling of freedom and joy, especially this time, the third time, as I've been visiting several universities. I've been overjoyed by the experience of meeting with many students and witnessing a little bit of their study and university life.
다들은 예시아디 니지당 교육고를 시아도시
Now, the topic you've asked me to address is compassion and the environment.
당의 background 시위는 미망부치 알이야 아니 교랑 에너지 가스에 쿠유 걸이야 토나 용과를 지당 안디 토리아 에너지 가스에 내가 최고하고 부지 대 감정 background 가르치 진행하고 싶다용데도 제장의 강술이야 디콜이야 디스트라이 더버총소스.
To give you a little bit of background, many people have asked me, what inspired you to become so concerned about the environment? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that to begin.
아니 나께서 대표 샤쇼크 롱바치 롱바쿠교르치 서머로 따든지 롱바차디야래 제자들이야 아니 가서 미세기 가서 modern development 카미야체 간다르지 베 상물로지 런중 컴리아 제주면 그럽시다 소주면 방소면 따든지 네버지 드리지 알이야 내려야 제상 로 깨버네 손데 로 둥고 봐도 엔드데기 지 크루지 나로 살론 충분당 안다는 신기 아주 수균기 다가서 초와계당 디토네 크루리아 아주 통신으로 그렇지 자치모 그지에 봐 다는 지 크루당 미버로 제바 미세근 제바 샤당 다디미네 진짜지 수수의 냠수녀와 고급 중요비 인두산에 대균선 대내 셈리아 숲톱 매버서 말아 셈리아 그뒤에 지 상해를 텐데야 다 간다 지금 천하 사무지 진여버지 안 그쳐도
I was born in a quite isolated part of eastern Tibet, and where I was born, there had been no great modern development. So I lived in a very natural and somewhat pristine environment. Until I was 7, this was the only environment in which I lived. So I experienced firsthand as a child a feeling of intimate connection with the natural environment. And I retain to this day a constant and extremely clear recollection of this.
But example to show you, but I'm also payulia rich redang energy chudan the manguare. The manchaging as a Holy Spirit summer that is touching with Hladwich. Now, had a loot and there's some of dance in the net of each yard. Just an as Shiraki, that digi, Sadan, Doda, the dig to share my chevchiche. The living beings and another living system of the Nijin Bijitan, Nazula be so necessary and another so crucial. Did seem being as you said to see it. Dana simping as you beg you shoot in the yard. The chu. The bubchu. On the bubchu is in all less steam somewhere the class of that. Bubchu nalolea, Namju, Bena, laboratory and Ravadang, Tulo tree and Kenzie tree and the Chigamare. Dana singi Bena. 탑장 나로래 매당 베컵라 야지 신다 뿐저지 샘진 뿐저지 매그난 샤워인비냐 다티디 독자르지 비지 pollution 차로에 그렇지 딘데르 지가 제가 딘데 토네 간다 가수에 kuzugi sem naroleya natural environment ji 가루에 사도리라는 좀 임비체 living systems 가라도 하당 루당 드레 두시를 치 두스타네 드레 두시 상마 시작을 하르스.
For example, where I was born, we regarded and experienced our environment as a living system, a living beings. The mountains, the sources of water were all regarded as the dwelling places of what I would call holy spirits of various kinds. We therefore respected every aspect of the environment as part of a living system. We didn't wash our clothes or even our hands in flowing water sources. We didn't cast any kind of garbage or any kind of other pollutant into the fire in our hearth. So we regarded the entire environment as innately sacred.
제가 등산 챌린지 가려서나 아주 롱베나 오마지 artificial garbage somewhere 되게 괜히 인기를 수업에서 괜히 매비 인자 아주 딱 괜히 상물로 the use reusable sanada 다가다 되게 정중기 괜히 마도베 artificial 괜히 스케어 말아 제가 등산 artificial 괜히 되죠 레연두산에 아주 롱베 밀리아 kuzu sambala nguma nanshin ge rengjung gi kasu garbage nanshin da da yu sha na an ko kasu da ji kuran me ba chan do de sam sam ro de ji sam dang ji de ji ge to ne kasu da nguma ngume ge choal kom da che du san ting sang gi artificial thing kasu ngo bu de le yin du san de zu kasu ne dang ka ji me ding a su go zu ma da.
One of the challenges that those who live in such an environment face nowadays is the use of artificial and non-biodegradable substances, because for the first time, they have to deal with real garbage. We didn't really have garbage because we used pretty well everything up, and anything that we did dispose of was easily biodegradable. And now, because of the introduction of artificial materials that are not biodegradable, we have to come up with new ways to dispose of them. And so this, to give you one example, is changing the lifestyle of people in such places.
Canada tigi chungdu gi cheza ngechun environmental ki chungdu philosophy dang tiga science da keke singya mane ina ti ngelia knowledge machungwe ngelia emotional somar tachi sonaru de susudang energy karu rangjung ki sonaru di ngene chung di gel knowledge gel chungro cheza ti gyuzan dene kada drijik jamjo jebe indusane ti gyuzan dene da 다다지 런중쿠 걸 삼던 뉴스단에 다지 knowledge 직보 많이 봐. 다대야 손안도 집에 토네 자르지 용도 섬섬 주세요.
Obviously, as a child, I had no knowledge of philosophy or science, but I had a strong emotional connection with and a strong feeling for the environment, which means that now that I've begun to acquire a little bit of knowledge, it isn't just knowledge. For me, it's based on my strong feelings.
Yes, Amalia Kashweda, Kuryugi Tadadi Kashweda, Kuyu Sungyuk Di Kwalia, Azu Samulatan Dona, Ji Kashwe, Chigli Chigdian Samrabadaji. 아저기 남윤기 이 미스디 더 쿠유 송겹디 잡아디 쿠유당 아주 잡아디 하고 쳐블이야 아저기 에네 가서 핀준 뚜루 나 핀준 가서 딘중 잡아디 하고 가야디 계신 차대도 성도
I think that in order to understand the necessity of environmental protection, we need to understand how connected we are to one another and to our environment. So in order to understand our connectedness, I think we need to understand interdependence.
배낭아주기 사회세 현배그 타랑아주기 류인디네야 간다 뭐 망보질 때네 지정중기 다 구들이야 된체 아주 소경 제거버지다 내거버지 차대야 알았어.
For example, for us to acquire or eat any food, have clothes to wear, or even to have the bodies we do, all of these things require the interconnectedness of many aspects of many things and many people within the environment.
세상 아술르다 숭진의 메시지로 남배시대 숭진의
올라서
object subject 아주 지 object subject 베너지 치게 런중 쿠요데 바지 object 더지 아주 subject 더지 근데지기 간다 boundaries somewhere 다들지기 가르베 디버루 버룰래야 파타여버지 근데지 아주 통과하래 세상 아주 딘데가 파타디 장타디 니어 동거야 지다 boundaries this maps 과디 개침지 차대고 성 딩아주디 가주디 딘중기 따와탈 덴시
The value of understanding interdependence in this regard is that we often feel at some distance from our environment. We divide the world into subject and object, and we feel that the external environment is an object separated from us by some kind of boundary and at some distance from ourselves as subjects. We need to dissolve this artificial boundary and decrease the distance between ourselves and our environment.
Today in Hindustan, nga zuigi rang da kuyu gin jeba de ngoma de nga zu shedo tuya ji dang nga zu da kuyu gin jeba da ta nyer dong ya lia dong tu de sang do stine chebina.
And I think if we do that, we can begin to feel how connected we are to our environment and how little distance, if any, there really is between ourselves and our environment.
The pebe nalolia chigi kuryu dang nangi semjen din jabade bezuen karasharasana nöden chugi bezuen shat. Chi kuyu di nöden che nangi semjen digi di chu che. Chi kuyu digi ngasul sustaining somberbe hold as somberbe hold che de chida and nangi semjen damje semjen digi di energy kuyu dela then nutrients somadaji dide bichi che de barchi ta drin dusan di gyunsin dena tigi nöden chugi 가서 벤션도 되게 아주다 쿠유 잡아디 and 사무인 되지당 energy necessary 되지 다들 전통으로 삼정게 있어.
In Tibetan, we often refer to the relationship between the external environment and the beings who inhabit that environment as the relationship between a container and its contents. We are all held by and within the environment we inhabit. We are like the contents or even the nutrients within such an environment. And it seems that it's necessary for us to begin to acknowledge that interrelationship.
Hindustan tindeji double level tense and kuyugi ngasulia ji karwe penugi shugente yarla ngasu yang kuyulia and shugen shate yaras mi mawaji samle nalolia kuyu sadi natural sad be yachimbu yibo shuchimbu yimba tene Hindustan and ngasu gi natural shugente to marasam duchi the reality we need to tell you the member ngazu ine apa shugente yare kuyu gutsu ine shugente yabti azu to singaras.
We therefore also need to acknowledge the fact that our environment can affect us and we can also affect our environment. Some people have the idea that the environment is so vast and so primordial that nothing we do is actually going to affect it. Unfortunately, that's been proven not to be the case. And we need to begin to acknowledge the interdependence, the aspect of interdependence that is our effect on the environment, even as our environment affects us.
Hindustan ine tang azulia tinde knowledge somra tinde chigi karwe understand you the pingyo mane kadu ine ngazul gyönji karchaga arasana understanding their energy person somra ta ngarazu cheda khasa sewana sin understanding the person the parulaya phangdachim partachim buye debichi understand the jikcha person gi kurangi namjung gi lega ledang da samdang de understanding the sira matyum debichi adrin Hindustan ti gyunsen dene azugi da understanding chebna singi and khasa digi reaction da ku behavior de tena sinji yomr cheblia azulia da ji emotional levels na dando from heart somar beta ji ning thabane azulia de kuyulia simgurudang ningji de kwa de kechim.
Well, we need to acknowledge these things. Mere knowledge or understanding alone, of course, is not enough. One of our problems is that we tend to separate ourselves as persons from our knowledge or understanding. And if we understand or know about the need for environmental protection but do not apply it in our daily lives, we're not going to achieve anything. Our knowledge, our understanding has to become so intimate, so personal to us, that it naturally changes our behavior, that we feel it emotionally and in our hearts.
Then you stand ngazu condition knowledge di ngazu gi misi da jabe ya bachi kuyu sungyup chia di misi da jabe ya bachi dang su su gi da kan da khachwe su su da tegar didu da jabe ya bachi to ne ngodru chia dang ti to lya sam dong di kechum shu cha di du sam.
We need, therefore, to reflect upon the fact that our knowledge of the environment really is a knowledge of something that's going to affect our lives, a knowledge of something that is going to affect our well-being.
Today, you stand that tea chodlimina energy because spiritual traditions and the religious tradition, the zugi kashre shevshu drutuya sana shemdi drutuya mango kashre shemdi drutuya chi yongresabel isheyes.
And I think it is in that regard that spiritual and religious traditions can serve the cause of environmental stewardship.
Today, you stand that in Nangwa Chibu Mane and Azugi, she got resembling Chulu, Samiegi, Tigi Kashreji, Shemdi did Drutuyak, Ishimbuyala, and Tana Sing Azugi Kashre, indigenous. The culture, the ancestor, the Zugi wisdom, ancient wisdom, the Zugi tending the Tolimina, Azugi, that the environmental protections that the Tadu Zamaimba, the Tsini Zama, Tsiri Zamaimba, the conditions Suzugi, Karjum Mizina Lolia, Suzugi, the Sonanda Jevda. Ning Taban di Mizina Lola, La Lenteptalia, Denden di Kashung Azula, Roram Set or something.
And when I say religious traditions, I don't just mean Buddhist traditions. I mean every religious tradition in this world can play its part. And I'm confident that if we do this, if we work together, if we apply the knowledge that is embodied in the many indigenous cultures that have survived, the ancient wisdom of our ancestors, we will be able to discover together that environmental protection is not just a point of view, not just a science, but must be a way of life.
Samsam Mumam David Nizutralia. 아주지 세리바당 출루 세두산에 다군인 가서다 가완 간다더지 드네주산다 직지 삼섬 직전에 탄 직전에 삼섬이야 에너미더지 직지 출루부 디즈 사이언스 가보게 사이언티스트 디즈 출루 가보게 되는 소지 직전 가보게 알아 챙겨 소지 다 임비네야 의니주 토할 임비나 땅 아주지 삼섬 즉 튜몽 그 토안에 아주기 로미당 안다나 신기 마음 점불링기 마음 배치해도 튜모고 토안에 냠도 시시 주도하던데 용스가 빼나 구육 내단들의 토를 채비미나 된데다 튜모고 토안에 아주기 시시 주고하디 간제도하디 삼동하디 개침을에 가르사나 구육 내된디 beyond somewhere religion beyond the political to chaye bindusan 아주 삼에 냠도 자주고야 돼 개심이 뭐지 라는 게 동의였어.
At various times in our history, science and religion have seemed to be contradictory to one another, have even become enemies, attacked one another, or to be more polite, refuted one another. But really, there is a great commonality of experience that we all share. We're all human beings living in the same world, relying on the same environment. And therefore, on that basis, on the basis of acknowledging our shared or common experience, we have to accept that the protection of this environment is beyond the views of any one religion.
제장 아주 참바다 니지기 뉘라 땅 아주 contradictory 게요 말은 something dos 참바다 니지기 뉘라 드린주스탄에 아주 냠도 레갈레와티 데 아주 냠도 take responsibility cheche 냠도 레갈레와디 다 개좀 쉽지다디 라바도 구역 내려는 데 아주 자차고 싶차디 알아 제장 아주 다 scientist 망부치기 아주 가시에 information 망부치기 알아 다 이내 망부치리아 information 망부치리아 ane di dabu gyam lalen tae tanye mebe kam tando ta gaba jangye de mangbu yong de bena climate scientist this gaba jangye de de du san di gyun ze de na azu genyam do ko de catch me is.
If we base our approach to environmental stewardship on being loving and compassionate, there should be no contradiction between science and spirituality. We can undertake and share our common responsibility for this environment. And in that way, actually put into practice and make practical use of the information that scientists give us about the environment and not live as though we are in denial of it.
다들 배낭아란 가지고다지 bendangazu 비게 히말라야다 아니 벽이 사스디 엔제지 가지고 에시아 지 가지고 춘주엔더지 추윤주엔더지 샤대아지당 다네 참자 third poles 가래 제가 구요도네 산에 계진을 차대어래 진짜 디 구요를 숨겨지야 걸래 야당 디도래야 지 가지고 고도배야 제도 아주디 토마 지 히말라야다 리귤리에베 권디티술량 아주 롭스트레지 아니 고주 쿠유디 개심이민 쿠유 꼴이야 고도배 안 되네 유세 에너지 가지고 커뮤니티리아 슈겐테도야 아주 배주를 지켜야래서.
The Himalaya, including the Tibetan Plateau, are considered a treasury of water that feed the great rivers of Asia and therefore supply so much water that sometimes the Himalaya is called a third pole. Therefore, we have to be especially concerned with the environment in the Himalaya and the conservation of water there. So what we have tried to do is train monasteries in best Himalayan monasteries in best environmental practices so that they can then present these to their local or neighboring communities.
제가 도망 어제 제인두산에 아니 상월로지 가서리 very emotional 서머베지 심규시라 대제 아니 다지 아주 지금 있어서지 미망부지리아 심규시 뭐시지 구마시비 태야래 얘네 안 참상 아주라다 lack of 서브레 다지 knowledge 서브레 scientific knowledge 당 안다는 신기 technique 디종 아주리아 용용이베 교연 시간 통디가래 제가 딘데체제 참삼 아줄리아 엔 체리부디 저기 갑겨로 가야지당 체리베 로람 가야지 드니두상 아주 상만냠도 레갈이야 여지당 냠도 에너지 셔시 가주에 점링기 펜디체 셔시 줘야 여지 아주 이게다 용촌로지 근데 총송.
When this subject was first introduced to representatives of these monasteries, they were immediately emotionally affected and demonstrated tremendous commitment to environmental stewardship in their region. But at the same time, we lack scientific knowledge and technical expertise. So in order to do this, we need the support of the scientific community and the assistance of the scientific community. And I mention this as an example of how, in order to preserve our environment, we all need to work together and offer our individual skills and knowledge.
다바지 드린 슈아드르시미다 안디 슈들이야 트워틀린 샤르브 딘시 유스레 인도스탄에 안당에 타마들이야 상으로들이 대표들이야 두시 슈아지당 안에 시라가바 총수야이스.
I'm going to end my initial address or talk with that, and we'll begin the conversation. Before we do, however, I again want to thank each and every one of you for coming here and convey to you my sincere delight in having this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Holiness, and thank you, translator.
Yeah.
We wanted to begin by picking up on a point that you've made earlier
Yes.
about the root of compassion is having a steadfast heart, the power of the heart. And this work with the environment for many people can be discouraging because it's so overwhelming right now. So could you speak about this need for a steadfast heart, the power of the heart in compassion?
다디 activist somewhere. The activist이야 activist 마체 디나네 가르쳐다 쿠르기 activist 마체 this emotional 차도 맞아 대지 가르쳐다지 그저기 배주망고 체내양 지 상쇼 요아 통하면 인자 마체 컨트롤 안 되게 차듯이 at least
Well, first of all, I would say that many activists, and especially environmental activists, naturally become highly emotionally invested in their activism. And when after years and years of very hard work, they don't see a great deal of result, they can become a little bit embittered and angry.
And crew go along with Shane, just not be touching Chandler or Nisha, do we get Shane, just not to Yangan this way. A touchy casual daisy, some game chan, Yang do some pretending.
And if you spend enough time listening to one dire prediction about the future of this planet after another from environmental scientists, even we listeners can develop a little bit of a problem in our brains.
Yeah. The Hindustan, Yanam Judas activists at Lia, Ni Yondings, Jig the Garasa, other Samalo activists, Jigilia, Shugan Tegavins. Nazugi, Kema, Karsura, Nazugi, Kemalami, the activist Chadia, Chigungaras.
I think there are two levels or types of activism. And the one is what we all practice. We can practice it by being supportive of intensive activism. But even if we are in denial of the need for environmental activism, because we're having an effect on the environment, you can call it a type of mere activism.
가르쳐 미유지 손제 탄도 랑네 된주야체도 베주샤다 액티비스트 니 용데 거봐 다 데인두산에 땅에 삼로데 가르잖아 간다랑 아주기 액티비 아주 다 가르쳐 남준에 지기질에 슈겐테데게 인두산 다 슈겐테게 하거나 다 텔레 상초 슈겐템닌지기 액티비스트 가르치는 맞지 미제비 균세요 말어. 가르잖아. 남준이 슈겐테비가 알아. 제가 디 균세되네. 슈겐테도 하고 인두산에 아니 상교 쇼와 교와 동년지기 가르쳐 액티비스트 미제비 균세 가임 다 대지 som동하지. 유서 sometimes.
The other type of activist is what we would normally refer to as an environmental activist, and that's someone who intentionally undertakes responsibility and puts great effort into the achievement of, in this case, environmental goals and changes. I think that one thing that's very important is for those of us who are less directly involved to take some responsibility and be supportive as much as we can of environmental activism. Because if you look at the situation, there is absolutely no reason not to support environmental activism.
다들이 인주스탄에 빼는 안다부치 미나 다들 vegetarian 차려. 다 디기 가저 vegetarian 사데 수수 제투야지. 남사 제초야 수수 바 타젠 미신다 고마고 수수 바 타젠 지야 주민 디응알에 심슈르 징도스. 그 수수군에 그 숨겹치야도 자와지 줍심버도 버지당. 다지 다 간다 지치기 위해서 말이지. 린 디균선되나 아주 여기다 지 심슈 봐야려. 된다 다 가서 지 차와려 무슨 주부입니다. 어느 정신기 가서 지금 알아서 말을 좀 드리죠.
To use myself as an example, I'm a vegetarian. And becoming vegetarian, which in my case is partly for environmental reasons, is something that anyone can do. It doesn't require an organization, it doesn't require the extensive scientific knowledge or anything like that. But nevertheless, as simple as it is, when you do that, when you make that kind of change in your life, it's very encouraging because you realize that you are not without power. You have the ability, even as one person, to do at least something that is beneficial to the environment.
제가 수수는 고중요하다. 수수진 유아스 땅나 수수 미진한다. 수수기 소야는 유아스 땅이나 되기 수술래야 뽑아침부지 진도로서 엄청 도스.
I think that the greatest source of courage for us in environmental stewardship comes from making such simple changes in our lives and realizing how much power we do have.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so Your Holiness, just to follow up on that last point, you raised the question in The Heart is Noble, where you said, what does it take for our ideas to move our heart? So that is, what is it that moves us to overcome our habits and desires like meat eating or mass consumerism? So I wonder if you could say a little bit about what it means to move past good intentions and move into actual action.
다들이야. 다들은 저번 예매 가 지진 렌즈 겸 Actually, you can repeat that again.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Well, Your Holiness, you mentioned yourself, you've written before and in talks that you've given that when you were quite young, you were fond of eating meat, but you had the good intention of giving that up. You now are vegetarian.
Yes.
And that is taking a good intention and putting it into
Still,
action.
I like meat, but it's okay.
But many people wonder how to take a good intention and to actually put it into practice.
Okay. 다디 그래서 다디 페낭아 어레다 페낭아란도 시미나 에너지 그래 중도에 샤서요 알아 안드린 비슷하다 다 샤마선 로게즈 쪽다 제상 가서 took long time 좀을 took long time 기점은 딱 간다 로망 붙일 도시 대브레 지당 샤사 대 야부 매버지 하고 알아 이네 야부 매버 하고 외국에라 단도 사디요.
Well, to use the example you brought up, my vegetarianism, as you mentioned, as a child, I ate meat. In fact, I only stopped eating meat about 8 years ago. So I kept on eating meat for many years. But I knew it was wrong. I still ate it.
근데 인도스탄에 닌지세네라도 다 간다 닌도벨이야 가서 닌게 톱스 두산 다 간다 텔이야 지 슝르버지 수수 빠르고 다 개침을 주지 가서 수수 당도 랑네 겐도 그렇지 아주 단 겐쿠르네 타지야 겐쿠르와다 안다는 신기 담자와서만 담자와 타죠 된지 과다다 개침을 차디게 말아서 정도 담자된 겐쿠르디 아니 수수기 수수수수리야 겐도 그 수수수수리야 탐자를 제제 아니 소수에 기타가로 랑가디 세버치 소가디 맞을이야 랭게 알아서 참여했어.
In that type of case, I think that the bridge is a type of compassion, a type of courage, the power of your heart. And by the power of your heart, I mean that which enables us to decide once and for all to take responsibility for our own actions as individuals, to be able to commit ourselves to accepting and fulfilling our responsibilities as a person.
Today, understand das, the understanding na no shasha when you tell a more deeper kind of the emotional level of my cheche that take action to check what it that catch you chadi are. Nam yung azugi sing na lolia. To Mahmoud advisor Mahmoud on that. The nation I the nation contain some. In Jimmy that take action to check what it did see sometimes.
So the bridge is that a mere understanding become more emotionally felt, and a deep emotional feeling based on understanding will inspire us to take action. Once we listen to the advice of our hearts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You spoke on science and religion, a very important topic, a very complex topic. I'd love you to speak a little bit more because for many years, scientists have been speaking about climate change and the environment. And now there's a new moment when some scientists are saying this is no longer an issue of science alone, but a moral issue. And that's what your work encourages us in this new dialogue of science and religion. Can you speak on that?
Wow. 아주디 가르다 다 공부스문은 시대 구육 내던데 빵랑게 내던지 차례도 성노스 the moral issue 랑바도 아주기 구육 내단데 crucial 내단 연구에 취급이 가르서는 아주기 human greed som을보다지 드라미기 안 명함나 되네 총대비지 명함 된 아주기다지 media the digital and increase chiga advertise increase chiga tell a dene ngaju sanglo do kashweji kashweda yimbina ngaju gin dengamla tayo mane debal genre mane ina rungjung kuruki resource telea genre ya deni lusa tikyunzen dene ngaju ngebara do sosu 아주 개인 코르 대응함되는 개인 코르지 컨트롤 시작하다 개츠시다 이내다디 가르베지 다데토로 의니즈 토리아 더 깔아캅시가 제가 안다디 최저 토한 랍지체고 네 삼발에 최 랍지사디 personal practitioner person 미 게소솔리아 지 펜토 예버전도 마세비 최저 토한에 베너지 글로벌 이슈스 말에 베너지 구육 내도에나 general issue에 디지털 이미나 최저 토한 덴덴기 가르베지 디지털 이미나 최 토한마 가르베지 랑도르기 랑가 세브지 된거아디 개점 시브레 삼청게였어 삼삼 띵아 저기 최 우리의 디지털에 삼삼 딱다지 디 제토가 많았어 디 삼성 아주 디제 feeling 아주 대서 원사버를 용도스 다 간다량 다다디 구육 내된디 다다디 지 가르르에 치기 내된 ಸಮಯ바 다디 난기 로미 심기 내된 차디 대단 잡아시비지 시저디 될 차디가 어렸음 정도스 디 차디 여기 인주산 된지기 꿀론되는 요아 마신 바도 안에 구율이야 요아 동사다 가라하고 싶지 구율이야 산정 요아야서 가라하고 싶지 자대 어렸음 정도 디 균zen되는 데려야 아니 최저도 안에 아니 지카르에 based on scientific knowledge 다나 신기 가르쳐야지 information 디토하는 그리고 가르쳐야 the key 너버디 가르쳐다지 아주 로고 체하기 아주 다 motivation 로고 체하기 key 너버디 에 최저 또한 제투야지 용거를 삼자는 도스 랍제테야지.
As you said, environmental protection or conservation is fundamentally a moral issue. And the reason, the crucial factor in it that makes it a moral issue is that the degradation or destruction of the environment has been caused by human greed. And our human greed, bad enough as it is to start with, has only been exacerbated, fed by our media and our advertising industry. The problem we face, therefore, is that human desire is limitless, but environmental resources are limited. And therefore, it is our responsibility as those who depend on these resources to rein in and control our greed. In order that we start doing so, it is essential that religious leaders, spiritual teachers, not only preach about individual practice issues or individual moral codes, but also about global issues, and that they provide moral guidance on environmental stewardship, because they are the ones who can evoke feeling, evoke enthusiasm, evoke an emotional commitment in their followers. Until we accept the fact that our environment is not external to us, it pervades us, it's within our bodies and our minds as well, it will be difficult for us to change our behavior. But the key to becoming really motivated to change the way we live and thereby begin to heal the environment, the key that will open the door to that type of motivation seems to be in the hands of those religious and spiritual leaders who are willing to provide moral guidance concerning the environment that is based on sound scientific knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So to take the conversation in a slightly different direction, Your Holiness, you spoke about the practice of dissolving the distinction between subject and object, the inner and outer worlds. And of course, there are many techniques for putting that into practice in meditation. You can study about that, you can practice it. But I wonder, does the practice of dissolving that distinction naturally lead to a feeling of connection for the environment, for an appreciation of the environment?
the practice meditation didu choye be chigo indusane ngaran didu choye be na mishinda didu choye yo indusa azu sam chigo re sang da chi le ton meditation sha da degi chi kar nga ju gi da xin nyam be di la leng ge thola nyam leng ge thola ja chi de jong di ara da na xin nga ju da xin je wa si du sane da de le yang ji che tho ru che che ane reni be ji da xian sa ji khosa 타대도 매버치지人이 다디기 차시에도 좀 다디 현디 차시함 현디도 차 근데 현디란 니도 차人이 진짜 차 차베 토네 이 디도르야 천알이야 수수기 그 호화질리 섬으로 100%리 가르쳐 초르도 쳐야지 이런데 요래 다가는 신기 대단념을 지금 아주 여기 구유고 돌아 이미네요 땡땡이 대단녀버지기 가르쳐야지 냠래 선하다 메디테이션 땡데 땡데 차유기를 섬처럼 뒀어
Well, we have a number of meditation practices, as you mentioned in your question, concerned with dissolving, the false boundary between self and other. One of these is contemplating the equality of oneself and others, which is fundamentally developing an empathetic recognition that just as I want to be happy and not suffer, so do others, and that in that we're exactly the same. And once you have taken this to heart, then of course you have to put it into practice and live accordingly. We also do meditations on exchanging oneself for others, where you actually imagine yourself in the position of another and that other in the position of yourself. And you try to imagine as wholeheartedly, as 100% as possible, how they feel, what they're going through, and then apply that. So there should be ways to extrapolate from these techniques and apply them to environmental awareness.
배나가지고 행동으로 삼다미는 지시 나서야지. 나저기 옥시전 그저 땅배 옥시전의 양우. 나저 파 땅배기지. 카본 다이옥사이드 가다. 다디 그저 파우 드니치거라. 나저 그저 땅아데 나저 땅아데 그저 우 드니치두산다디 지 나저 넘기 동랭기 자디 아니 지 사모동무 버신데 예데베서 근데 그 토안에 간다는 아주지 우기 교화 직보인데 비지 우름 직대데 비지 우기 교화 직보인데 비지 아주 다 간다지 우 당서를 직인데 비지 근데 그 토알이야 아니 지 메디테이션 세비나 땡땡 아주 천왕한테 지 간다 미신도 비지 나로 데 우기 교화 직보 교회 랑가도 직보인 근데 삼동 아주 길이 삼탕도스.
For example, if we think about the fact that trees, so to speak, breathe out what we need to breathe in, oxygen, and we breathe out carbon dioxide, which they seem to need to, so to speak, breathe in, so that our exhaust is their air, and their exhaust is our air. This is something we don't need to imagine. This is a fact. So if you contemplate that, just the interrelationship or interconnectedness of breathing, of our breathing and the vegetation, things that grow, that could be a meditation technique in and of itself. Because if you feel that, you realize that we're really two parts of one whole machine or one whole system.
We wanted to give a chance for a few questions from the audience which were submitted in advance.
Yes.
So maybe two
Two.
out of some very
Thank
good
you.
questions.
Thank you.
The first one is on climate change. Climate change, or global warming, appears to be the world's greatest crisis. But there are many people who deny global warming exists. What advice would you give to working with people in the government who believe there is no need to protect the environment?
I don't have all the solutions. I think this is
You don't have to answer it either.
this Tatilia di Kasram Chojini Kuyugi Yundo Sad, Namshiki Yundo, climate change sad, Yachambushi. Yachata Chene, Tin Yundo de Azuita, Gotum, the Tortuam, Yachata, Tormento. 따이는 이모지 초와 준비걸로 직전에 출래 차대. 그렇지. 인도산 디균제되네 deny 챙기듯이 지보 말에 지당 미규마듯이 고조티 climate change 열었잖아. 이라 가르소에 베나팅사 별이야 댕에듯이 가바르던 주사 가르서는데 별 넘시 장모여 와. 제가 고도 니마 줘야 가봐요. 스테 줘야 가봐요. 장모예죠. 다 등산 간데도 등산 야본도 남시 차로 친 야본도 쓰고. 고저디 차로 친면 누구지 통과하면 다 야본도. 된다지 용데 요래. 대이네아디기 딜이야 등이 공도 쉬버는 신기. 다지 politician 다 망보지 deny 치가 알아데 이면에 등이 공도 쉬버는 신 가지고 and church the religious leader tizul devache dinjig thwane tizug doshul den azu faith in karshweji devotion is somewhat that dinjig doshul den che azu gi di karshwe den den ta azu climate change da andana shingi kuyug nedun tizo karshwe daji chukcher ton toyaji yungrsam lusteng dos.
Well, the climate change is a huge process. It's very vast. It has all kinds of sub-bits and pieces. And it's a somewhat gradual process so that we don't directly feel it or notice it day by day. By the time that we all feel climate change, it will be far too late to do anything about it. So there really are two levels of denial here. There's the denial of those who are actual climate change deniers, politicians and others. And then there's the denial that most of us live in of climate change, where because we don't actually feel it, it's not really in our minds most of the time. And then there are little pockets of odd reactions. For example, Tibet is a very cold country. It's often hard to get warm enough. And so the global warming, some Tibetans have greeted this with enthusiasm, saying it doesn't get as cold as it used to. It's much more pleasant. As for what to do about politicians and others who are active or outspoken climate change deniers, the best thing might be to appeal to support from religious and spiritual leaders because they have so much influence over their respective communities or devotees.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Your Holiness, the last question is one a number of our undergraduate students asked. And that is, how can students in a university like Yale organize themselves to take fruitful and positive action for the environment? What can they do that's practical?
당이 고시는 시에 지단기 environment demonstration 차단 드리지 아주 지 다나 신기 디톨이야 베너지 가르쳐야지 미세기 take action 위치야 망보 중요한데 가래 다이는 개시슈디 당부 수수는 거주야 개시슈도 가르쳐 수수기 교환을 당한지 제비미나 되게 된된지 수수지 제비 인류상 될 댄시네 and 수술이야지 인도 전부 깨야지 시자 야고 싶지 중원에서 대매비 체제 수수용의 미센 교화스케 당문이 위치 미신다 지금 삼제 드리지 레와르지 expectation 제비나 다 디그 삼성 가솔이야 돼 지금 수수 지 가서 레와 센라 같은데기 지 가서에 레와 세비 천하 미진빙 해봐요. 스트림디 유저들 수수는 고주고야 돼. 다시 지게 좀 그래. 안 상으로 미제레신도 지기질이야. 수수용에는 유아 그리고 갈아가서 방지. 디는 고주지. 간다. 구육이 가르쳐야지 프로텍션사 디는 고주지 해야 돼. 다게 개좀 쉽지만 또 something도 다나지 수수기 aspiration디 아니 수 미신다 수수도 명함 집어여 봐. 디수도 냠도 루루체지. And so aspiration the lonely in the which is somewhere. Kergan which may be aspiration the Karshu Tumongi aspiration which have chich. The Rijig also take action to chat the case.
Of course, there are several things we can do as groups or communities. The usual types of environmental activism, demonstrations, raising our voice, and so on. But fundamentally, each of us has to start with ourselves. Because the only solid basis for the type of courage it's going to take to actually make these changes comes when you have made changes in your own life and have begun to feel the effects of that. And that courage can't be taken away from you, so you won't lose it in the process of a long career of activism. Otherwise, if we attempt to change or convince others to change without having changed the way we live our lives ourselves, we will be fueling ourselves, not with an internal courage, but with expectations. And when others don't change the way we would like them to, we'll become disillusioned and possibly totally burnt out altogether. So we have to start, whatever we may do on a social or communal level, we have to start by making individual changes in our own lives. And then another thing that is necessary is to have a support community, a supportive community of those who share one's own environmental aspirations and ideals.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'd like to conclude by thanking His Holiness for reigniting hope this evening. And I'd like to say it was 20 years ago that we began a project at Harvard, actually, with one of the first conferences on Buddhism and ecology,
Yes.
and then the other world religions and ecology.
Yes.
But it is our great joy that Yale has picked up this idea that religions and ecology can work together, which you have highlighted today. And our School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, with the students there and students from religious studies and divinity, I think are giving us hope because they understand this. They want to work with your communities, and we want to figure ways into the future. I want to end, though, with a special thanks to our dean, Peter Crane, who has held up this effort between the School of Forestry, Environmental Studies, and Divinity. And tomorrow night, we're going to continue the conversation with Peter Crane, scientists, ethicists, and so on, between these two schools to examine the new papal encyclical, which will be coming out this summer exactly on this issue, which can affect 1 billion Catholics, 2 billion Christians, but be in dialogue with the efforts that you're doing. So tomorrow night at Lindsay Hall on High Street at 5:30, we invite you to join in this discussion that will complement the wonderful words that you have given us tonight. Thank you for your hope, and please come back to Yale to visit us.
Please do come
Thank
back.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
La sola.
Go ahead.